So I'm going to skip the cheesy YouTuber intro, and I just wanted to talk about my favorite engine in the world. What I think is probably one of the most well-designed engines ever produced. It serves its purpose, and it serves it very well. That is the REO OA-331 engine in my 1952 military truck. Now, of course, this is completely subjective, so in the comments be sure to tell me what your favorite engine is and why. Obviously, an engine should have enough power to get the job done. I wouldn't want to swap a Briggs & Stratton engine into my Dodge Ram. However, when you push the power limits of an engine, you very quickly start to break stuff. So on my 331 cubic inch inline 6-cylinder engine from my 1952 REO M35 certainly doesn't win any horsepower competition, especially compared to modern engines. It balances performance and ruggedness perfectly, with leaning more on the side of ruggedness, but it still has plenty of power to get the job done. One big reason I love this engine is the fact that it's an inline 6-cylinder engine. Inline 6s are one of the most perfectly balanced engine configurations. It doesn't require a very specific harmonic balancer or a super heavy flywheel in order to run without tearing itself apart from all the unbalanced forces inside the engine. With a properly designed harmonic balancer, your V8 isn't going to completely self-destruct. And even without a harmonic balancer, it's not like the engine is going to immediately explode. You'd most likely wear down the bearings slightly faster, but the fact that there's an engine configuration that doesn't even need them, why not keep things simple? Speaking of simplicity, the design on the head is where we compromise on some rugged simplicity in order to make enough power to get the job done. The simplest engine would be a flathead, like that old Briggs & Stratton. However, that design severely restricts airflow into and out of the chamber, and it robs power. I would love it if I could find an engine block platform that I could put several different heads on in different configurations and put it on a dyno and see what differences these different head configurations make. But my REO OA-331 has overhead valves, like all modern engines. And while this means it does have more parts like rocker arms, push rods, and lifters, it's still very reliable, but it makes decent power. The engine has overhead valves, but not an overhead cam. The cam is in the block, and the valves are opened through push rods and rocker arms. Now, you would think that having experienced the famous Hemi lifter failure firsthand, I'd prefer an overhead cam engine where the cam directly opens the valve. In theory, it has fewer moving parts, no lifters, no push rods, no rocker arms to fail. However, lifter woes aside, overhead cam engines come with their own complications. They have more power and efficiency, but they have a more complicated timing system, and if there's multiple cams, it's even worse. Besides, with no needle bearings to go bad, all the lifters need is some zinc in the oil, and they're good to go. I value the simplification of the timing system much more. Now, when it comes to the timing system, people will always debate over what's better, a timing chain or a timing belt. The proponents of the timing belt say that a timing chain stretches out over time, which can slightly mess with the valve timing. Now, I would expect a belt to stretch more than a chain, but maybe they're talking about in the short term. I wouldn't feel comfortable trusting my engine to a timing belt, especially if it's an interference engine, which most modern engines are. That belt snaps and your pistons contact valves. At best, you're looking at a few bent valves, but it can be so much worse. The fact that timing belts are on your maintenance schedule tells you all you need to know. When do I need to change my timing chain? Sure, it'll stretch out a little bit and change my valve timing by half a degree. It might rob some power, but it'll still work. However, my favorite engine, the REO engine, does not have a timing chain, and it doesn't have a timing belt either. It has timing gears. Metal gears, one for the cam, one for the crank, and they drive each other directly. There's no stretching that, and if it does break, you probably have some bigger issues. If this engine was not a pushrod engine, if the camshaft was overhead, this timing configuration would not be possible. The fact that the camshaft is close enough to the crankshaft that it can be driven by gears, and I can also change a head gasket without having to mess with timing chains, I say that's a win. Every engine out there has replaceable bearings, cam bearings, main and rod bearings, etc. They're made of a softer metal. They're designed to wear out without wearing down the expensive parts, like the block or the crankshaft, and you can replace them. The REO engine takes that philosophy and applies it everywhere else. First, you have cylinder sleeves. The cylinder wall is important for keeping the combustion contained. It has to be the exact size to fit the piston, so that the piston rings can seal, and it has to have cross-hatching to catch oil, but it can't be too rough or pitted. You can hone a cylinder if the cross-hatching is gone, but if there's significant pitting or damage, the only thing you can do to save that cylinder is bore it out and put in a slightly bigger piston. Not in this engine though. This engine has cylinder sleeves. These sleeves are made of hardened metal and are removable. You can hone the sleeves, but if there's damage to the sleeve wall, it won't damage the block. You take the sleeve out and replace it. This means the block will almost never be beyond repair. The cylinder head has a similar system for the valve seats. The valve seats are where the valve meets the cylinder head. The valves must make a good seal in order to maintain compression. The cylinder head on my REO OA-331 engine has replaceable valve seats, so if a valve seat is worn or damaged, it can be replaced and the head can be saved. Unfortunately, only the exhaust valve seats can be replaced. I wish all the valve seats could be replaced, but I guess the exhaust valves are most likely to wear. Either way, one replaceable valve seat is better than none. The only downside to these replaceable parts is that the engine is so old that these replaceable parts are hard to come by now and super expensive. I've talked about carburetors versus fuel injection before, and basically my experience has been that fuel injection has better turnkey reliability, where it will work without messing with it in a wide range of conditions. However, if something does break, it's hard to work on. When I think of the best engine ever, I want something that I can fix, especially in a pinch. Because the troubleshooting is easier, sometimes the fixes are quicker, and if you understand them, it'll serve you for several years. I really like the fact that my REO engine is carbureted. I mentioned that the engine doesn't make a ton of power, especially compared to modern engines. Only about 130 horsepower with all the accessories attached. It's also not a high revving motor. It's governed at only 3,300 RPM. However, it punches above its class in terms of torque, peaking at almost 250 pound-feet of torque, and the torque band is very flat, so you don't have to worry about being at the right RPM to make enough torque to get the job done. Now, this is where I have to admit that my favorite engine choice is limited. I love the Cummins 6BT engine, and it's very similar to the REO. It only has about 30 cubic inches more of displacement. They're both inline 6-cylinder pushrod engines with 2 valves per cylinder. Of course, the Cummins engine is a turbo diesel with a compression ratio of 17:1. My truck has been detuned significantly so that it can run on low-quality gasoline, and the power and torque figures were made using 80-octane gasoline, which you can't even get anymore. However, part of the reliability is the fact that it is detuned. Everyone knows that increased power comes with increased risk of breaking stuff. Another reason I like the REO engine so much when compared to the Cummins is the fact that it's naturally aspirated. Turbos are just another complicated part that can break down. Also, the Cummins B-Series legacy is scarred by killer dowel pins and batches of blocks with bad casting and irregular updates, which can make it hard to find the exact replacement part you need. The REO 331 was designed to be a very reliable engine to meet the needs of the US Army, with the idea of restoration and repair in mind. These engines were meant to serve a lifetime, and even though the service life for many of these was cut short due to the introduction of the multi-fuel engine, many of them had second lives in the civilian world, and even some stayed in military service for decades. I wish more engines had replaceable cylinder sleeves and valve seats. It would make rebuilding an engine so much easier, and more engines could be saved from becoming paperweights. Let me know down in the comments what your favorite engine is, and if you think V8 engines are overrated, be sure to hit that like button.